My name is Tessie, and before I begin, I want to say something up front, before making any judgments. Please listen to the entire story. There are valuable life lessons here, and I believe we can all learn something from what happened to me. For the longest time, I considered myself happily married. My husband, Jerry, and I shared a relationship that felt effortless, full of joy and laughter. We had our own way of keeping things exciting, and one of those ways was through playful teasing. If there was one thing Jerry loved to talk about, it was how incredible he was in the bedroom. He had this ongoing joke about being the best I had ever had, and he took immense pride in it. Now, here's the thing, he wasn't wrong. He was truly good, and he knew it. Over the years, he would boast, not in an arrogant way, but with the kind of confidence that made it clear he believed in himself. He would randomly remind me of the things he could do, the things he would do, just to keep the anticipation alive. It became part of our routine, something that added a spark between us. And honestly, I enjoyed it. Hearing him talk about himself that way never bothered me. Instead, it made me laugh, and at times, it even built up the excitement for when we were alone. To me, this was never anything serious. It was just us, our playful dynamic that kept our relationship feeling fun and alive. But little did I know, one small joke, one simple sentence, was about to change everything. One night, Jerry and I were unwinding in the living room, enjoying a quiet moment together after a long day. The TV was on, but neither of us was really paying attention, it was just background noise as we relaxed. As usual, Jerry was in a playful mood. He started his usual teasing, and tonight was no different. He stretched out his arms and said something ridiculous about how he would carry me into the bedroom and make me sing in every language known to mankind. I burst into laughter, shaking my head at his confidence. It was so exaggerated that I couldn't help but find it funny. He kept going, adding more details, hyping himself up as if he were some kind of untouchable champion. It was harmless, just our usual back and forth. Maybe it was the mood, or maybe I just felt like throwing in a little playful jab of my own. Without thinking too much, I smirked and said, "My ex has always been better than you in bed." The words slipped out as a joke, a silly, teasing response. I expected Jerry to snap back with something even more dramatic, turning it into our usual playful banter. Maybe he'd roll his eyes and call my bluff, or he'd scoop me into his arms and say something cheesy like, "Let me remind you why you married me." I had braced myself for some kind of exaggerated reaction, something equally ridiculous. But that's not what happened. The moment I said it, his entire expression changed. His smile vanished, and he suddenly turned cold. It was as if I had flipped a switch inside him. For a second, I thought he was pretending, playing up the drama. But then, without a word, he stood up. He didn't say anything. He just walked out of the room. At first, I thought he was pretending to be mad, trying to make a point. You know how people act upset for a little while to make you feel guilty? That's what I assumed was happening. I expected him to come back into the room and maybe crack a joke about how I needed to get my eyes checked or say something sarcastic, to fire back at me. But that didn't happen. Instead, he stayed out of sight for the rest of the night. The next morning, I woke up thinking things would be back to normal. I figured I'd find him in the kitchen making his usual coffee, maybe giving me a small side eye but ultimately moving past it. I greeted him with a simple, "Good morning," just to test the waters. No response. Not even a glance in my direction. He picked up his coffee mug and walked away as if I wasn't even there. That's when it hit me, he was actually upset. Not pretending to be mad or sulking for attention, but genuinely, deeply hurt. I told myself he just needed time. Some people take longer to process their emotions, and I wanted to be the bigger person by giving him space. Maybe he needed a full day to shake it off. But that night, when he walked right past me in the hallway without even acknowledging my presence, I started feeling uneasy. I tried again, this time a bit more directly. "Jerry, are we seriously not going to talk today?" He didn't even stop walking. He just went straight into the bedroom and closed the door behind him. By the second day, the silence was unbearable. It wasn't just that he wasn't speaking, he wasn't even seeing me. If I walked into a room, he would either leave or act as if I didn't exist. It was the kind of treatment you'd give a stranger, not someone you shared a home with. I kept replaying the moment in my head, trying to figure out if I had said something worse than I thought. It was just a joke, right? A stupid, offhand comment meant to tease him. But clearly, to him, it was more than that. By midweek, my patience started wearing thin. I could admit that my joke was out of line, but was it really worth punishing me like this? It felt like we were in some sort of twisted standoff, except I was the only one trying to end it. One evening, I sat next to him on the couch, hoping the silence would force him to speak. Instead, he picked up the remote, turned on the TV, and pretended I wasn't sitting right there. That's when I knew, this wasn't just about cooling off anymore. He had decided to shut me out. That realization stung more than anything. I had always believed that no matter what happened, we would talk things through. That was how relationships worked, right? But now, I was sitting in my own house, feeling like I was living with a stranger. And the worst part? I had no idea what to do next. By the end of the week, I had convinced myself that things would eventually get better. I kept telling myself that he would calm down and at least hear me out. I had rehearsed a dozen different ways to apologize again, to explain that it was just a joke, to remind him that our marriage was stronger than one careless comment. But as the days stretched on and the silence between us remained thick and unbroken, a small part of me started to worry. Maybe I had underestimated how deeply my words had hurt him. Maybe this wasn't just about the joke anymore. That evening, I heard the front door open and close. Jerry walked in without a word, his expression unreadable. He avoided looking at me. Then, without hesitation, he reached into his bag and pulled out a stack of papers. He walked over to the dining table, set them down in front of me, and slid them across the surface. "Sign it." At first, I didn't even process what he meant. I frowned, staring at the papers, my mind scrambling to make sense of what was happening. Then, the words at the top of the document hit me like a slap to the face. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jerry's face remained cold, his eyes empty of the warmth I had known for years. "It's over, Tessie." I let out a short, nervous laugh, still thinking, hoping, that this was some kind of twisted attempt to get back at me. A part of me was waiting for him to break character, to smirk and say, "See how it feels." But that moment never came. He just stood there, arms crossed, waiting for me to pick up the pen and end our marriage. That's when I realized, he wasn't playing. This wasn't some exaggerated way to make a point. He had actually filed for divorce. Over a joke. I felt the air leave my lungs as I stared at the papers. I wanted to say something, to tell him this was ridiculous, that we had been through so much together, and he was really willing to throw it all away over a stupid comment? But looking at him, I knew, he had already made up his mind. I refused to sign. My first instinct was to fix this, to make him understand that I never meant any harm. I thought that if I explained myself, if I laid it all out for him, he would see reason. So I tried. I told him it was just a joke, a stupid offhand comment that meant nothing. I reminded him how much I loved him, how solid our marriage had always been, and how absurd it was to throw everything away over one sentence. But every time I spoke, it was like talking to a wall. He barely responded, only shaking his head, refusing to engage. When reasoning didn't work, I apologized, again and again. I told him I was sorry for hurting his feelings, that I should have never made that joke, that I would take it back in a heartbeat if I could. I swallowed my pride, put my ego aside, and begged him to reconsider. But no matter what I said, it wasn't enough. His mind was already made up. He didn't see my words as a joke anymore, he saw them as the truth. He was convinced that for me to say that, I had to have been thinking about my ex. In his mind, there was no other explanation. The idea that I could have just blurted something out to get a reaction never even crossed his mind. He believed I had compared them before, that I had replayed my past relationship in my head so many times that I still remembered the details of my intimacy with my ex. To him, my words weren't a joke. They were a confession. I tried to reassure him, to tell him that my ex was nothing but a memory, a closed chapter one hadn't thought about in years. But he wouldn't hear it. He had already rewritten the story in his head, one where I had never truly moved on, where I had been secretly longing for someone else while lying next to him every night. It didn't matter how much I explained, how much I swore he was wrong. He believed what he wanted to believe. I realized I was no longer fighting to explain the joke. I was fighting against a version of me that he had already created in his head. And no matter what I said, he wasn't going to change his mind. And the scariest part? There was nothing I could do to change his mind. The days after that night felt like a blur. I went through the motions, waking up, sitting in silence, watching him avoid me, but it all felt like I was watching my marriage crumble in slow motion. At first, I was angry at myself for saying it. I kept wishing I could rewind time and swallow my words before they ever left my mouth. Maybe if I had just laughed instead of speaking, or chosen a different joke, none of this would have happened. Maybe I had destroyed everything with my own stupidity. But the more I thought about it, the more I started to question, was this really just about that one joke? How could a single sentence, something meant to be playful, be enough to break an entire marriage? Was our relationship so fragile that one bad joke could shatter it? Did my husband really love me the way I thought he did? Or had I been blind to something deeper all along? The more I reflected, the more uneasy I felt. Maybe this wasn't just about what I said. Maybe Jerry had been carrying insecurities I never knew about. He had always been confident, or at least, that's what he showed on the outside. But what if all of that was just a facade? What if he had been convincing himself just as much as he had been trying to convince me? Then another thought hit me like a punch to the stomach. What if he had already checked out of our marriage before this even happened? What if he had been waiting for a reason to leave, and I had just handed him the perfect excuse? A person doesn't walk away from a life built together over a joke, unless they were already looking for an exit. I wrestled with these thoughts in silence because, no matter what the truth was, one thing became painfully clear: he wasn't willing to forgive me. He wasn't willing to have a conversation. He wasn't willing to fight for us. And if he wasn't willing to do any of those things, then maybe I had been the only one holding on to this marriage all along. I spent another week trying to fix what felt like an impossible situation. But no matter what I said, no matter how much I tried, Jerry refused to budge. When he placed the divorce papers in front of me again, I didn't cry this time. I didn't beg. I didn't argue. I just looked at him and asked one final question. Are you really willing to throw away our entire marriage over this? He didn't hesitate. "You already did," he said. And that was it. That was the moment I knew I had been holding on to something that no longer existed. So I signed. Not because I wanted to. Not because I stopped loving him. But because I finally understood that a marriage where one mistake, one joke, could end everything, was not a marriage worth fighting for. A relationship built on real love should be strong enough to survive misunderstandings. A marriage built on trust should have space for forgiveness. But if Jerry had truly loved me, he would have listened. If he had truly trusted me, he would have understood. And because he didn't, I had no choice but to let go. I wish I could say it felt freeing, that I walked away with my head held high. But the truth is, it hurt like hell. It still does. But what hurts more is realizing that I was the only one fighting for us. And a marriage where only one person is fighting, is already over. Looking back, this whole situation taught me things I never thought I'd have to learn the hard way. People say experience is the best teacher, but I never imagined my own marriage would become a lesson in itself. It's easy to stand on the outside and say, "Oh, she shouldn't have joked like that," or, "Oh, he's way too sensitive." But real life isn't that simple. When emotions are involved, people act in ways that don't always make sense. And honestly, that's exactly what happened here. Here's what I've learned. Communication is everything. If you're in a relationship where one bad joke can destroy everything, then there's a much bigger issue beneath the surface. Because let's be real, happy, secure couples don't break up over one sentence. They talk things out. They express how they feel. They try to understand each other. But in my case, Jerry didn't give me that chance. He shut me out completely. And that made me realize something. If your partner isn't willing to have an open and honest conversation with you, then your relationship is built on sand. It might look stable for a while, but the first big wave will wash it all away. Ego and insecurity destroy love. I used to believe love was strong enough to overcome anything, that if two people truly cared about each other, they'd find a way to work through their problems. But I've learned that's not always true. Because sometimes, pride is stronger than love. And ego? It's like poison in a relationship. If someone values their pride more than their partner, then no matter how much love exists, the relationship is bound to fail. If someone won't fight for you, don't fight for them. I spent days trying to fix this. I apologized. I explained myself. I gave him space. I did everything I could to show him our marriage was worth saving. But the truth is, it takes two people to fight for a relationship. A relationship should never feel like a one-sided battle. If someone refuses to meet you halfway, it's better to walk away. Not every joke is worth making. But, not every reaction is justified either. Look, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I was completely innocent in all this. I poked the bear. I made the joke. I pushed his buttons, knowing he had a bit of an ego about this topic. I get it. But did I really deserve to lose my marriage over it? That's the part that still stings. Because yes, I may have lit the match. But he's the one who burned everything to the ground. A healthy relationship can survive misunderstandings, bad jokes, and even mistakes. At the end of the day, I'll take responsibility for my part. But let's be real, Jerry overreacted. And I can't help but wonder, if the roles were reversed, if he had made a joke about an ex, would I have filed for divorce? No. I would have rolled my eyes, maybe teased him back, and then moved on. So, what do you guys think? Was I wrong for making the joke? Or was Jerry's reaction way too extreme? I'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in my place? Let me know in the comments.